It isn't easy to be a multilingual. You have to divide your day between a lot of different tasks. When I think about the languages that I want to know and to master, there are a lot of them, and it's difficult for me sometimes to divide my day between them because I want to improve my English constantly. That's my main tool of work, the tool I use to teach most of the time, the tool I use to write most of my writings. I want to preserve my Hebrew, which is my native tongue, and this requires some time during the year to continuously read in Hebrew. In addition to that, I need to teach in Danish, so I need to improve that language significantly. I also need to read in Danish continuously. Norwegian and Swedish are similar languages, they are almost dialects, but in order to be able to read in these languages and to understand them, I need to invest some time. In order to keep the level that I reached in German and in French, I need to read in these languages once in a while, because if I would not do that, I would just forget. So that's another significant amount of time that I have to invest. And in addition to that, I try to learn new languages. Now I'm learning Italian. For the last year, I spent an hour learning Italian every day. So this means that I have much less time than somebody that speaks just one language and wants to improve this language continuously. It's not a coincidence that many of the people that speak languages very, very well are monolinguals. So they know just one language, but they know it perfectly. What I want to do in this short video is to offer you 3 tips or ideas that you can use as multilinguals to improve your knowledge of English, not your other languages. That's a separate issue. I don't consider myself an expert on being a polyglot or improving many languages at the same time. My purpose is just to improve your English if you know other languages and have to spend a fair amount of time learning and improving and using the other languages that you know. I am Shai Dotan, Associate Professor of International and Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and this is my first tip to improving your English when you are a multilingual. And this is something that I've thought about at a very young age and implemented since then with great success. You need to get yourself accustomed to think in English, to have an inner monologue where you are combining words and sentences in English and not in another language. Now, I first came up with this idea when I was around 12. I gave some thought to the question, what do I need to do to improve my life, my future? And I realized that the main thing I needed to do was to improve my English significantly. Remember that I'm an Israeli. I started to study English only when I was about 9 years old and at a very, very low level. At school, the level of studying was very, very low. I didn't have so much exposure for other resources. There was no YouTube at the time, so I didn't really get a chance to hear a lot of English in the news or by other content that I would get. My level was very low. I could barely put a sentence together when I was 12, and then I started to think that I needed to improve that, and I made this decision. And this led to several techniques that I used. One thing that I decided was I just need to read a lot and to use the dictionary regularly. And I went back home and I found the thickest book that I could find, which was a translation of all the Grimm fairy tales to English. And I just read it, and every single word that I didn't know, I checked in the dictionary. And that helped a lot. And we will discuss it in another time. But the second thing that I decided was, when I'm thinking, having an inner monologue, I should do that in English. And that's not an easy thing to do when your English is that bad, but that's something where you see great improvement over time. Now, a prerequisite for that is that you have a lot of time during the day where you have this inner monologue. And that's something that I am really sorry we missed in the modern age, because I remember hours every day walking from place to place, going around in my city, which had a lot of nature, going around with the dogs, a lot of hours during the day were hours in which I was just thinking, just musing for myself. And as you're thinking, you're building sentences, and if you do that in English, you will get better. So if you want to get better fast in English, decide my inner monologue should be in English. At first it looks very artificial, but then it becomes completely natural. And then try to get more opportunities to have this inner monologue. So time when you're just thinking. And this will lead to an improvement in your English because it will make it more natural. And that's something that doesn't require any particular effort, like getting into writing or things like, or reading a lot of books. First implement that. And if you want to make a big improvement, just say all the other languages that I know. When I'm reading in these languages, of course, I will be thinking with them. But when I'm just musing for myself, I will do that in English. I will think in English. And this is the first recommendation on how to improve your English as a multilingual. Second tip to improve your writing and speaking in English as a multilingual is to continuously immerse yourself in English. This means that you're always reading also a book in English. I remember that when I started to study, my grandmother used to tell me, just make sure that every other book that you read is in English. And because I usually read books at the same time, so I have several books lined up that I'm reading, I always think about that. I always say, I want to have a book that is in English while I'm reading. Many times students ask me, what books should I read? And we will speak on that with regard to vocabulary, how to build your vocabulary as fast as possible. The main rule that I have regarding reading books is quantity trumps quality. So I'm not going to tell you which books to read. I want you to read a lot. There are different advantages to different types of languages, of writing styles. Some writers are very, very clear and easy to understand. Like Malcolm Gladwell is the GOAT in this respect. He writes beautifully. It's so easy to read him in a flight. Within 3 hours, you finish the book and you feel like you understood everything. And that's a great advantage, but there are many authors that write differently, that use a much larger vocabulary, that are more difficult to understand, and you can get things out of them. But what I want you to do is don't hesitate too much. So you go to the library. If you're living in an English-speaking country, that's the easiest. If not, get books in used bookshops. That's a great way to get. And don't overthink it. You see a book on a topic that is interesting for you. You see even a translation of an author that you like into English. Get the book, start to read. I would much rather that you read 200 pages a day of the worst kind of books that I would recommend, than that you read 50 pages a day of perfect recommendations for reading. So read a lot, immerse yourself in English. You can definitely improve your English significantly also by hearing. So be exposed to movies, for example, or to series in English. But reading is very, very important. Reading is a much better way to improve your vocabulary. Reading is a much better way to improve your writing because you're seeing the sentences. It should be always part of your diet to continuously consume books in English all the time. So every week that goes by, ideally every day that goes by, you're also reading in English throughout the year. The rest of the time you can read in the other languages that you know, and I realize the importance of that, especially if you live in a non-English speaking country. You need to know the local language. You need to spend time on that, especially if it's not your mother tongue. You need to do that continuously. I understand that. But always keep English as part of your diet and read regularly books in English. Third tip for improving your English as a multilingual is to designate a certain amount of time every year or every semester for concentrated improvement of English. Part of the reason I took on the obligation to teach the legal English course at the University of Copenhagen, and I continue to teach it now that I'm directing the course twice a year, is because this gives me an opportunity to focus on English for a certain amount of weeks every year. I can see the improvement over the years because in this time I'm not just reading a book in English in addition to books in other languages, I focus. I read style books, I go over my notes, I try to write a lot and improve in English more than I do regularly. And I want you to do the same, even if you can't teach a course in English. I want you to tell to yourself, okay, I'm going to take every 6 months, a month that is the English month. And in this month, I'm focusing on English. So I could, for example, triple the time I'm reading in English compared to the other languages. And if I'm reading, I will check more words in the dictionary. Or one of the things that I really like is to read the style book. There are so many good books out there. So read a book by Helen Sword about writing, or read. Even though I said that the most important thing is quantity, you can say I'm going to read a great writer like Steven Pinker, for example, because I want to emulate his style, or read George Orwell because I want to emulate his style. So focus on that and say, I read English all the year. All the months of the year, I read English continuously because I want to continuously immerse myself in the language, and I'm thinking in English, and I'm writing a lot regularly. But this month, I designated specifically for improving my English, and I increase my efforts. Reading new style books is a great way because you continuously get new tips and you refresh your ideas. You consider again, even if you don't do it as openly and as systematically as I do when I teach the course, but you're thinking about your writing. And you will see sometimes contradictory recommendations by these books. So that's exactly the time where you reflect, you debate between different ideas, different schools of writing, and you get better. So the last tip says, in addition to continuous immersions in English all the year, I designate a certain month where that is my focus. I really focus on English. So if you're going to do these 3 things, continuously think in English and find a lot of time to think and use your email in a monologue to improve your thinking. Throughout the year, immerse yourself in English all the time, reading regularly in English, listening to English sources, speaking regularly, getting ready to improve your language continuously all the year. And then a certain month of the year or a certain month every half year, focus in English as much as you can. If you can, use this opportunity of this month to have an exchange abroad, to go to an English-speaking country. This is the best. And that's what I tell to all my students, and I'm very happy that every year I convince some of them to do that. So going abroad to an English-speaking country, that's a great way. But if you can't do that, make a conscious effort to tell to yourself, every day I will focus on my English and improve it. If you do these 3 things continuously, you will see improvement over the years in your English, even as a multilingual, and even given all the other tasks that you have, considering the other languages that you know and your other interests, which may exceed the issue of language.